Welcome to Theology Explained for Beginners. Our topic is Jesus and Mary, and we'll be studying the scripture. We'll be exploring parallels in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. This is already the second part. This is a continuation of our earlier discussion, which is part 1 of Jesus and Mary. What we'll be doing is to examine the Old Testament, and we'll be uh, studying on how these stories in the Old Testament point to the New Testament, specifically to Jesus and to Mary. In the Old Testament, we have uh, many stories, but we can point out the three dominant stories, and that would be the first story would be the story of Adam in the first creation. And we also have a story of Moses in the story of Exodus out of Egypt to the promised land. And then we have the story of the kingdom of Israel. And they have this first king, which is David. So how does these three stories with these three important people point to Jesus? So in the New Testament, the first story about Adam, which is the creation, we also have Jesus. And in Jesus, we have the new creation, and Jesus is the new Adam. So the old Adam points to the new to Jesus, who is the new Adam. Then with Moses, there is an exodus um, during his time, and in Jesus, there will also be an exodus with the people of God from the slavery of sin to the promise of the kingdom of heaven with God. And so Jesus is the new Moses, pointed by the first Moses. Now, in the third story, which is David, which the kingship and the kingdom of David, Jesus is a descendant of David. And so Jesus is also the promised king. Jesus is the promised king prophesied during the time of in the Old Testament. The king should be a descendant of David. And we have here a passage from the 2nd Samuel chapter 7 verse 13. This is the promise of God to King David. So in this promise, God told David that his descendant will have a throne, and the kingdom of this particular descendant of David will the kingdom will be last forever. And this promise points to Jesus, because Jesus is the descendant of David. He is the one who will have this throne, and his kingdom that will last forever, and that will be his heavenly kingdom. And we can see here in the genealogy that David and Jesus are related. So Jesus is a descendant of David, and he is the promised um, king who is a descendant of David. Now, besides these main stories of Adam, Moses, and David pointing to Jesus, there are also side stories, minor stories found in between or in these particular stories. So for example, in Adam, you have the story of Eve. Eve, the first woman in the first creation. Now, this points to the time of Jesus, because in the new creation we also have a new Eve, and in this new Eve is Mama Mary, and we have discussed this in the first uh, first first topic, not first part of our lecture in Jesus and Mary. Then we have Moses. The side story would be the Ark of the Covenant. So there was the story about the Ark of the Covenant, which was carried to the tabernacle, and it contained the Ten Commandments, and also they believe the presence of God is with them in the Ark of the Covenant. Now, this points to the side story during the time of Jesus in the new Ark. The new Ark, and there is already a new covenant. So, this new Ark with the new covenant, inside this Ark is by the way, this ark is pointing to this ark is Mama Mary. So the old ark points to Mary as the new ark, and inside the womb of Mama Mary is Jesus, who is the who is the Word of God in the flesh, and also the new covenant. Now, the third story, which is about David, how does this connect to the side story of the New Testament? Let's find out first who is in this side story of David. So, Jesus is the fulfillment of the promised king, descendant of David, and it's this story about the throne. Now, our side story is related to Solomon, who is a descendant of David. Solomon became also the king. He became the successor of David. And so Solomon is also along the line of David, and so he is also related to Jesus. Now, let's take a look at this passage, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 19, and this is to the story of Solomon. Now, Bathsheba, who is the mother of Solomon, went to King Solomon. As he approached King Solomon, a throne was provided for the king's mother who sat at his right side. And so to give a throne to his mother, the mother is, was made the queen of the kingdom. And she sat with authority at the right side of the king. Now, this action of King Solomon making his mother queen became a tradition in the kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Israel. That's why all the kings that succeeded Solomon also installed their own mother as queen. It became a tradition in the southern kingdom that the queen is the mother, not the wife. And so you have there here in this picture Solomon and her mother, his mother Bathsheba, sitting at the right side, and she is the queen mother. And so, if we have the Queen Mother in the story of David in the Old Testament, and Jesus is the King of Heaven, so the side story that is being pointed out by the Queen Mother of the Old Testament is the Queen of Heaven, because Jesus is the King of Heaven. Now, is the Queen Mother really found in the New Testament? Is it really mentioned? Yes. We can find another story in Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 18 to 19. Here, the specific word Queen Mother is mentioned. The context of the story is that the kingdom of Israel has been invaded by foreigners, and so the king is being asked to surrender. But not only the king, the queen mother should also be included to the ones who will surrender. So queen mother is really exists in the Old Testament. And so we have the queen mother of the heavenly kingdom, which is Mary. Now, take a look at this, how we have this queen mother. We have David, and Jesus is the descendant of David. He is now the king, and his mother, Mary, is the queen mother. Now, let's discuss another story, which is about the seven trumpets and then the Ark of the Covenant. Now, let's find out how the story in the Old Testament about Joshua. In this story, the context of this story is Jericho, the invasion of Jericho, and how this would point to Jesus. So we have the Joshua 6. If you read the Old Testament, you have the story of how they invaded the old city of Jericho. The old city of Jericho was very difficult to invade because of its high walls. So God instructed the Israelites to parade the Ark of the Covenant together with priests, and these priests carried with them trumpets. So there were seven trumpets, and they paraded around the city of Jericho for 7 days. And on the seventh day, of course, when they shouted, the walls of Jericho came down. So, how is this related, and how does this point to the New Testament? In the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, specifically chapters 8, 9, and 10, we have seven trumpets also, as written in this slide in the below the lower portion of our slide. And when we get to the seventh angel who will blow the seventh trumpet, verse 8, chapter 8, verse 2, and I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and then they were given seven trumpets. And so when we get to the seventh trumpet, Revelation chapter 9, verse 15 to 18, uh, after the seventh trumpet was sounded, the the um, the ark was seen. The ark was seen after the seventh trumpet was sounded. Just like in the story of Joshua, there was a trumpet and the ark was with them. Here, there's seven trumpets, and by the time this is the book of Revelation, and by the time of the seventh trumpet, the ark was seen by John. John is the author of the book of Revelation. So John saw the ark when the kingdom of heaven opened. And so this ark was seen by John in heaven in Revelation chapter 11 verse 19. And when there was thunder, there was lightning, and then when everything cleared, what what he saw was a woman. And this is already the continuation, Revelation 12. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Now this woman is pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs in the agony of giving birth. Now, if you read the story following this following these verses, this woman will give birth to a baby boy who carried an iron rod and will destined to rule the nations with an iron rod. And that is the quotation from Psalm 2. And that Psalm 2 points to Jesus. And so the baby boy of this woman is Jesus. And so this woman in the Catholic tradition is Mary. And so from the earlier slide that we discussed that Mary is the Queen of Heaven, so this is fulfilled when John saw Mary crowned with 12 stars. So a symbol that Mama Mary is the Queen of Heaven. Now, the final part of our discussion would be how Genesis, which is the first book, will point to the story of the Revelation and how the story of the whole Bible ends from the beginning and how it ends. And these two are related. So in the book of Genesis, specifically on the first part, the first creation, we have this story of the woman who became Eve. Woman was what she was called before she committed sin, and when she committed sin, she was called Eve. There was also a serpent in that story, whom we know as Satan, and then the first man, who is Adam. Now, in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, earlier we have mentioned the woman clothed with the sun. Uh, in that story, we have three uh, mentioned characters. So these three individuals mentioned on that chapter 12 is a child, a serpent, and a woman. So the child is the baby boy is the child of this woman, and there was a dragon, a serpent there. Now this is understood as the is Jesus, the serpent is Satan, and the woman is Mary. And so if we take a look at the parallels, we have the first story, we have woman, Eve, and then we have woman again in the New Testament, book of Revelation, Mary. And we have the dragon in the New Testament, who is also Satan. And we have Jesus as the last Adam, and the last Adam or the new Adam, Jesus. And so, what a wonderful story that in the book of Genesis we started with the first creation, but this story in the first part of the Bible is a failure, and humanity came into ruins. But when the book of Revelation is read, the story really is a happy ending because this woman and Jesus is victorious of Satan. Satan was defeated, unlike in the first story of creation. So here, Satan is defeated, and we have Jesus and Mary who is the victorious. So we have a happy ending in the last book of the Bible. And that ends our second part of Jesus and Mary. I hope you have learned a lot. Thank you very much.